Hey, Roman, I'll pass it over to you.
Yeah, hi guys. Welcome to OpenHour. Nice to see well-known faces as well as I think at least one new face. So, what we're going to be doing today is just talking a little bit about our Community Kits initiative, which is something that we've put together to try and bring more people into the fold in terms of developing and producing and distributing environmental toolkits. However broadly we want to define those. So, we've got sort of a first class of people who've either participated with us in the past or who are working towards things now who may show up over the course of the hour to talk a little bit about what they've been up to. But we're also interested in hearing from people that might be a little newer to this about what kinds of things they might like to see or what kinds of questions they have about community kits or us in general. Yeah, we're growing, so it's exciting to have a bunch of us here together to talk. So what we can do, and I know we're just after one here, but what we can do is we can kind of go around and introduce ourselves really briefly. I'll start with myself and then start working my way around the screen. So I'm Bronwyn Densmore. I work with Public Lab. I'm based in Brooklyn, New York, and I work with the Kids Initiative, and so as you guys are all kind of putting stuff together, I'm going to be one of the people that you'll work with sort of as you're making stuff. And if it's sort of at this point also, if you have any sort of questions or you want to introduce stuff that you're working on or hoping to be working on, might as well throw that in too. So the next person I see in my rotation is Jeff.
Hey, I'm Jeff. I am with the Public Lab staff, and I guess I've been really excited about Community Kits as an initiative because I think, even before Public Lab was a nonprofit, like our best stuff came out of our communal efforts and our community work, and often then out into the world in a cardboard box. And it's a really important way that, not only can we try to prototype solutions to things, but also we can refine the stuff we use, because there's nothing better than getting, 20, friendly, helpful early adopters to break your project over and over to figure out what needs to be improved about it. And I guess I'm excited that, part of Community Kits is that Public Lab as a nonprofit is here to help, the next generation of kits get out there in that way.
Bronwyn, you're muted.
Sorry about that. The next person I see is Programmer 1200.
Hi, my name is Zachary Marlowe, or Programmer 1200. I'm from rural Missouri, a very small area out here, only about 500-600 people. I'm currently working on the flow meter design and modifying the spectrometer with a little bit more 3D printed additions, and trying to add those cavettes, more cavette to the idea. From there, to be honest, I don't know much more to say, but my background is in enviroscience. So.
Great. Cool. Welcome. All right, so the next person I see is Amanda.
Hey, hi everyone. My name's Amanda. I am the kits coordinator here at Public Lab, so whenever you place an order or have a question, I'm usually the one to get it in the mail or respond. I'm based in Providence here with Jeff, and I've only been with the company, I think, just about 4 months.
Gretchen.
Hi, my name is Gretchen. I also work with Public Lab and am interested in kits broadly. And I'm especially interested in how we can I guess, work together. We talked about like kind of like community driven and community coordinated like versioning and kind of organization of that. And I'm still curious about that and hoping to support it.
Yeah. Stevie?
Hi, I'm Stevie calling in from New Orleans. I do some of the outreach and community development stuff with Public Lab, but I'm specifically interested, I think like my brain right now has been a bit on some of the microscope kit that we've been talking about, as well as one of the community kits that's been out there for a while but hasn't been brought into the Public Lab store is the hydrogen sulfide copper pipe method, and there's other H2S methods too. But that one for me, I think one of the things that is really kind of floating to the top of my brain space in terms of questioning for this program is how do we work on iterations on the kit? Because, for example, that one has a number of pieces that could be switched out for alternatives potentially. And then how do we, like when that decision is made to do that, how do we make sure that the information from that, like on the kit is, and the changes that are made is transferred over on the Public Lab website as well, so that people can see the history of transformation of the kit as, you know, as the exploration expands with people getting their hands on it.
Okay, great. And you guys, I'm making some notes in the chat just to kind of keep our questions in mind for later. And then the next person on my list is Chris Fasty.
Hi, I'm Chris Fasty. I have been making kits for about 4 years. And these are all kits of kite aerial photography rigs, brackets to put a camera on to hang from a balloon line or kite line. And I didn't intend to make kits. I intended to make kite aerial photography rigs. And I was sharing the designs on the Public Lab site, posting research notes as I developed them and as they became usable and as I used them. And I knew that as soon as I posted my design for one of these things, especially since they were 3D printed, someone was going to ask me if I could make them one. So to defend myself, before I posted the final version, I just started my own web store about 4 years ago and put a kit up there and put a price on it. So my kits are purely defensive. And about 2 or 3 years ago, Public Lab started to carry some of my kits at the Public Lab store. And they're still there. They're now 3 or 4 different camera rigs available at the Public Lab store. And they're also still available at my store. And Jeff has one of them. You just hang that on a kite and it works great, especially when there's a lot of wind.
Great. Okay, Liz?
Hi there. I'm also on staff at Public Lab. I'm calling in from New Orleans. And the question on my mind, because Stevie and I will be speaking with the group in China about their organizing tomorrow at 7 in the morning. And they have a kit called the No Flow, which is above our price point. At the same time, they're like very excited to work with Public Lab. So what do I tell the No Flow team at 7 a.m. tomorrow?
That's an excellent question. Let's figure it out.
I'm going to get a stack on that one. All right,
Jeff, you're going to put that in. Sarah, you're next.
Did you say me, Bronwyn?
Oh, yeah, Sarah Wiley. Yeah.
Hello.
Hello.
I'm Sarah Wiley. I'm an assistant professor at Northeastern University and was a co-founder of Public Lab way back when. And I've been working on the hydrogen sulfide mapping project. And I've got a kit that's, I'm hoping, is ready to kind of go on to being prototypes and shared on Public Lab, and just trying to figure out what the next steps are for doing that.
Leslie, you're next. Zen girl, sorry.
That's okay. You can call me either. So yes, I'm calling in from Philadelphia. I'm a volunteer community organizer for Public Lab, and I have an interest in kits because I'm also trying to help out with the hydrogen sulfide kit. And I did just write a grant from Mozilla, but that doesn't necessarily mean it will get funding.
Okay, great. And Sean, I think you're muted.
Hello, can you hear me?
Hello, yes.
Hi, I'm Sean Montgomery. I got this invitation to join this group, and I was interested because I run an engineering company, and then I also on the side have been working on figuring out how to test for lead in public drinking water around the United States. And so we've been working on different testing models, and so I was curious what you guys are up to and what kind of synergies there are here.
Great, awesome. It's really exciting. So yeah, I mean, I wonder if maybe we can hear just a little bit from Chris and Sarah a little bit more about you know, your experience working with an open source community to do this kind of thing. You know, why you kind of came to Public Lab with this work to start with, and kind of what you've learned along the way. Just sort of a way of advice to folks that might be newer to this kind of working model.
Well, the Public Lab community, it really did drive my work on these kits. I didn't fly cameras on kites until I met Jeff. And I met him by accident, and he introduced me to the idea of putting cameras on kites and balloons. And I think the first thing I did then was, well, I actually bought some kite aerial photography rigs and some kites, and I played with it for a while. And then I backed the Public Lab Kickstarter, I guess the balloon mapping Kickstarter, the one that had the added awards of the 2 cameras, the infrared camera. That was I guess about 3.5 years ago or so. Yeah, I guess that's, no, actually it was longer than that, wasn't it? It was like 4.5 years ago. So at that point I made my first kite camera rig to hold those 2 cameras, because I couldn't find any place to buy one that would hold 2 cameras. And I shared all of that process as research notes at Public Lab, and then when I was using it, I shared some of the results of that. And it was having that very friendly, comfortable audience for my research notes. No one ever left any nasty comments, except for Jeff.
Well, you know, Jeff.
I've learned a lot about Jeff since that first fateful day when I saw him give a talk at a conference.
All right, Chris.
You remember that great day too, Jeff?
I do, but I feel like I'm being poked fun at.
So
I might go leave some comments on your notes.
Another important Public Lab influence was that sometime in this process of my building these, my first kite photography rig, Public Lab fixed me up with a 3D printer. They got a donation of a bunch of them, and I ended up with one of them. And before it even arrived on the truck, I had learned how to use a 3D CAD program and made the part that I had trouble making on my first kite rig. So I knew the 3D printer was the perfect thing to make this part. And as soon as I got it, within a day I had printed this part. And I just went, this was just a little teeny leg bracket. And I just started from there and made the rest of the rig and 3D printed it. And it was that point, after I had made many of these and perfected it and got it to work and published some of this at the Public Lab site, that I realized that people were going to ask me to print them one. And I defended myself by starting a web store, which is still there and still running. And since then, I've worked on things other than kite photography rigs. And in the last year, I've mostly worked on developing data loggers based on Arduino. And kind of for the same reason, but I think partly just as a way of participating with the public lab community. It's nice to make a little Arduino toy that logs data. And it's nice to publish a note at Public Lab about it. But there's much greater sense of accomplishment that this project is meaningful if you make it a product that you can sell to people. So I'm not actually making these into products to make money, because you can't make money doing this. Don't develop a kit for Public Lab if your goal is to make money, because you won't. You can't charge enough for them to actually make anything. So in the 4 years of running my own store, I've done a little bit better than break even. That is, the money I have to spend on eBay and Amazon buying stuff to put in my kits, and the money I have to spend shipping them out to people, about equals the amount of money that people put into my PayPal account when they buy stuff. I do make a little bit of profit, but that's before I pay anyone. So if I paid myself $1 an hour for the time I spend working on these kits, the Captory would lose a lot of money. My company would lose a lot of money. So this is really just a hobby. And it's a really fun way to display your accomplishments. But instead of having a bunch of research notes or blog posts about your things, you have a store and people can go and look at all of the things that you have for sale. That's what I've accomplished. So it's a very strange relationship. I've never sold anything before in my life. I've never been in business. I've barely even had a job for my entire life. So being thought of as a businessman or a capitalist is very foreign to me.
So
but
I think
that's what I'm becoming.
I think this is, it's an interesting point. I think different people get into this in different ways and explore it for different reasons. Some people do end up making money. Public Lab is a nonprofit, so we're not like the industry leader in that. But the purpose, I think you're right, is to get things out into the world and exchange things so that people can, new people can get into projects. I think in that spirit, we have some new people on the call as well. Do we want to sort of hear how people came to know about even this call, let alone the Public Lab Kits initiative?
Yeah, but I would like to come back to Sarah in a little bit also, just to talk about her work, and especially how the stuff that she's working in is being sort of applied in the field. I think that's really interesting. So yeah, do any of the newer folks kind of want to hop on in and sort of to talk a little bit more about the work that they're doing and sort of why maybe they're thinking about kitifying the stuff that they're working with? Anyone can raise their hand. Oh, Leslie.
I think Sarah could probably speak to this too, but after meeting people at the recent summit for factory farms and hearing testimony for people who are pretty much broke and living under conditions of, having hydrogen sulfide that they're breathing in daily and causing trips to the ER and having medical workers not believe them, I think it's pretty critical to offer kits to people. Just so that they have an affordable means of testing for themselves so that they don't think they're crazy, and to prove what conditions they're living in so that then they can take some form of action.
Yeah, and if I can follow up on that, that's exactly what got the hydrogen sulfide project kicked off, is way back in 2009. Before coming to Public Lab, I had been building web tools for community monitoring of the oil and gas industry, and some of the people I'd worked with in Colorado had reported these sorts of experiences. So they're home stinking of rotten eggs. One worker that we met with had been knocked down at his workplace and his co-worker had died. And he had tried to file an OSHA complaint and ended up getting fired. And so we heard very much these stories from what it's like living around unconventional oil and gas in Colorado. And that's really what kicked off our development of the photopaper method for looking at hydrogen sulfide. And so just a bit on that method development. Basically, early on, we wrote a how-to guide with a little bit of funding from the American Anthropology Association. And we did some really quick and dirty testing of using photographic paper in New Mexico. And this is based on research done by a volcanologist called Claire Horwell. And so the guide kind of stayed in that state. I started working with communities in Wyoming when I moved to Northeastern, and we tested on some properties there. And here's a paper about that work that we did with communities in Wyoming. And we quickly ran into some really interesting questions about open sourcing the kit and the method and the results, because people that we were working with were actually pretty hesitant to share their results on their property on Public Lab directly, in part because the corrosion stuff has meaning for them in terms of property damage and health effects, and affects their property values. And so, everybody in here is anonymized because of that. And it was also like a really big, complicated time in Wyoming because there was a ban passed on citizen science in 2013, and it basically made it illegal to gather what was called quote unquote resource data in open land, which by the definition of this law was any land that's not incorporated into a township, which is basically huge amounts of public land. So it was illegal to even take a photo on non-public land at this point. And so it made the woman we were working with, Deb Thomas, and all the community members we were working with super hesitant about sharing what they were doing, in part because they were worried they could, and luckily that ban has since been overturned, hence the publication of this paper. So I think there's some super tricky questions about open sourcing a process of kit development that is tied to prototyping on people's property. So that's one question I think is really important to talk about. And then the other thing we really struggled with is how to then prototype the kit if we're not doing it on people's property, and needing a constant source of H2S. And so we tried and put up some notes on Public Lab about how to do chamber studies for hydrogen sulfide, but I couldn't get anybody at my university to say, yeah, it's okay for you to run hydrogen sulfide experiments that last 24 hours a day for 10 hours in my lab. And so the source of hydrogen sulfide that we eventually found is the sewage treatment plant in Boston. But they're covered under the Patriot Act. And so can't take photos there. And in order to publish the results, we have to go through their board before sharing anything online. So we're at the point now of working on basically a paper that gives you a way of looking at the discoloration of photo paper, compares it to other methods that we've co-located at Deer Island Sewage Treatment Plant. So you can say, if this paper is this dark, how severe is my corrosion? How could this be related to hydrogen sulfide? We basically have, based on that, developed a kit, which is the kit that was tried out at the recent barn raising. So, and I don't think Deer Island they're excited about this work. They've supported us throughout this. So I'm certain that they're going to let us publish the results. It's just that there's this struggle with publishing before they've looked at it. That's another question about how to do a kind of open source kit development. But that's pretty unique to this hydrogen sulfide problem. Not every kit is dealing with a neurotoxic gas. So I
just wanted to mention someone who is calling in from over the phone. There was a little noise in the line, so I apologize. I muted you for a moment, but then it passed. And also just wanted to say, welcome to the call. I know we can't see you, but we hear you, and we'd love to know more about you. If you're able or willing. If you don't have a good connection, that's fine too.
Yeah. So, well, welcome 559 caller. And so I posted some links to the methods that you're using in the chat. And I wanna come back to that also in a little bit to actually talk about the tool development and sort of the life cycle of doing that, sort of in our online open source community. I'm curious. I don't know if Programmer 1200. I know you started posting a bunch about your project this past week, and I'm curious to hear a little bit more about sort of what you've been developing.
Well, I wanted to go into more detail. I mean, I'm interested in water science, so I thought having to go further with the spectrometer. I thought a basic photometer would be nice to have on the site also. That way you could test about the clarity of the water, and just more details the better, I always thought. So, and my idea was, it's a very basic machine overall, but I don't know how complex people like to get things on here, but it's simply one sensor and a small Arduino. And I'm using a very cheap. I tried going as cheap as possible on my sensor. It's just a $4 sensor from Adafruit, and then a small Adreno Nano, and in a 3D printed frame. I mean, the results I've gotten so far, though I have not had no real water tests. I'm just doing I'll just be honest, some coffee tests of different thickness and different amounts, and see how the results come out so far. And so far, it's going great.
Great. Yeah. I also just dropped a link to your kit that you posted online the other day into our chat, so other folks can take a look. And that's a little bit about sort of exactly kind of the trajectory that most of our tools have been going through, and what we're kind of solidifying, I guess, for the community kit checklist. So, yeah, so as you start doing those tests, or kind of bringing it out in the field, what we can do is kind of help you kind of boost your signal a little bit so other folks can weigh in. If this is the kind of thing that somebody else can put together using stuff that they can pull together, the more people that we have kind of doing replications, and then kind of.
Yeah, and that's really what I want to see. I would love to. I mean, even if someone can't 3D print themselves, I'm happy to go and send them the 3D prints if they need to.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, and we can help you kind of sort of negotiate some of those things. So that's pretty exciting.
I mean, yeah. I mean, the initial cost of this is not that expensive, luckily. I mean, each print I did the math, and it only ended up being about 75 cents each. So, I mean, it's not that big of a deal.
All right. Yeah, that's impressive. I mean, one of the things that we've been kind of easing out of the store this past year, so our prototyping kits, so the things that maybe might not be their full realized polished version, but that the community might want to sort of pick up and sort of help troubleshoot as part of the development. And that's kind of one of the things that can be really fun about an open source community. That's maybe a little bit different than doing this in a committee somewhere.
If anyone even has a little interest in this, I'm happy to go and send them a kit if they want one. I mean, I guess it takes me a lot to build, and I know it's out of my pocket, but I'm willing to share if I can.
All right. Well, let's see what we can get. I mean, we've got. I see that you've got a picture of your kit, and then in the chat, somebody's asked if you can post just a step-by-step with photos of how you sort of assemble and test
Yeah.
this.
Absolutely.
Great. Liz.
Yeah, but I had a follow-up to what Bronwyn just asked, which is, have you already worked with photometers or equipment like this so that like you have an expected range of values for like certain known samples? Or basically, how can we come to understand how, what kind of level of data quality, and I like all levels. I just want to know what level it is that we're getting.
I'm you're hearing me right? I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry, my internet is bad here. I was just wondering how we could come to understand how accurate the readings are that come out of this, and like what units the readings are in, and can they be compared to any other equipment that people may have, any not open source equipment that people might have just bought and they got familiar with kind of the data formats that equipment gives out. Do you know what I mean?
I totally understand what you mean. I'm still working on figuring that all out right now. Right now, all the data coming out is all based in lumens. So just basically what it is. And right now, you can see it from, I posted some of my results. Most of them are ranging between 500 to 700 lumens, all depending on that. And it all depends on your light source, of course. At the very moment, I'm using a Dollar General, very cheap laser to get my light source. And I just did that for a price range. I just wanted to keep it as down to earth as possible. And it already has a circuit built into it, so no one has to go through the trouble of building the circuit or anything like that. And I found out if you take off the lens of the laser, it acts more like a red lead than it does a laser then. And then it just makes it easier for everyone if they don't have to deal with, laser itself, it's a full, like a single beam. And I don't think that'd be very good in the results and how accurate you can get it to point at the sensor itself. So I think a LED would be better.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, like this sort of also maybe is relevant to the H2S project or the various H2S projects. On Public Lab, you often see that multiple people are working on a problem from different sides or with different techniques, or even the same techniques, but like they're building it slightly differently and stuff like that. And I think it's really, that's really awesome about Public Lab, that we don't have to be like competitive as if we're a bunch of different companies. We can actually independently do the same thing at the same time in different ways, and that actually strengthens all of our work. So actually, I'll try to connect the dots between this turbidity project Zach's working on, and there's another thread going on about using spectrometers for turbidity that someone I think just commented on maybe today or yesterday with like notes on how you could set it up or something like this. So I think there's different threads there. And I think on the H2S side, the question about how to safely test H2S, I think there's many different ways to approach that question. But I know Jack Summers has been working, this was some years ago, on like a safe way to do tests and then to like digest away the H2S so that it doesn't hurt anyone. And someone named Sophie also. So it's interesting to, the more we put these questions out there, the more we can say, well, actually 4 or 5 different people are chipping away at the question in different ways. So that's sort of the nice thing about this. And we could even imagine sending out a dual kit. Imagine that 2 people solved a problem in different ways. We could have a kit and you get both of them and test them side by side. That's already a good idea with an off-the-shelf sensor.
Bronwyn, are you muted? Are you talking?
I was sorry. I think Sarah wanted to hop back in for a second here. She's on the stick.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the idea of sending out dual kits. That's a really good idea, particularly for something like the hydrogen sulfide, where copper and silver corrosion can be used to kind of correlate to each other. So that's, you know, one thing that we've talked about, and the photopaper kit is currently linking to Purafil, and I think, Gretchen, you ended up posting some things on the Purafil corrosion coupon, which combines silver and copper to look at rates of different corrosive gases. So I think there's a lot to be done thinking across those two kits in particular. So that's a great idea. And then the other thing that I've been thinking of in terms of how to, make the kits and the validation process kind of speak to each other, because the tricky thing about prototyping the kit is like figuring out that, you know, is the knowledge valid at the same time as you're building it, which is so tricky when you're dealing with something that's potentially hazardous and could be really scary. And so one thing that I've been coming to for the photo paper, and if it's okay, I'd like to share my screen quickly. Would that be okay, Bronwyn? Just to show you an example of a kind of collaborative validation document that I think we could work towards on that kit. So here we go. Is that working? Are you guys able to see?
Yes. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, so great. So this is what I'm trying to work towards with the Deer Island sewage treatment plant stuff, is basically each of these is a circle of photographic paper, and comparing to Purafil's scale, which has the corrosion coupons, severe, harsh, moderate, and mild corrosion, then kind of benchmarking a sewage treatment plant as having, you know, harsh corrosion, you know, within one place in the plant. So for instance, in our plant, this would be the grit room where raw sewage comes into the facility. And then basically, so these are example samples that have been out in homes and on properties, and you can see some people are coming back with severe, what would qualify as severe corrosion around their properties. But if lots of people were using this kit, and we could XRF them, which is how we look at the amount of silver that's bound and estimate the amount of corrosion, then we could benchmark all sorts of different locations against this same scale. So for instance, Zen Girl, if you were going to do this in Philly's sewage treatment plant, we can add Philly's sewage treatment plant as another benchmark down here. We could think about adding a CAFOS or CAFOSs as benchmarks up here. And then, you know, I think the really neat thing about that is we'd be developing a scale that's not based on parts per million or concentration per se, but on kind of lived experience, like the idea that the air on your property is actually worse than within the municipal sewage treatment plant in Boston, where this air has to be scrubbed and cleaned before it's vented to the outside world, is a really compelling thing for communities to be able to express. So I think if we could start thinking about these kinds of scales that the kits develop, and then benchmarking different places where they're used against that scale, it could be a really powerful form of validation, and also try and move the conversation away from concentration per se as this abstract thing, but rather, you know, this is a location where we recognize that H2S is a problem, we manage it collectively, and yet, you know, here's a CAFOS, here's somebody living around oil and gas, and somehow it's not regarded as a problem there. So that's just a little bit about how I'm thinking of developing it, and I'd love to see if Public Lab wants to help share these kits, if we could replicate and build on that model.
Sarah, that's amazing. If you could restate what the model is in one sentence for the notes. I have that the concept is to move validation away from parts per million, and then how should we discuss what you're proposing?
So it's kind of like, you know, we collectively have a physical, so think about Nick's work, we collectively have like a physical sense of how bad contamination of hydrogen sulfide or a toxic gas is within a sewage treatment plant. And we're sort of able to, socially, we've said, like, this is too high, this air can't escape into the world, we will treat it in this location. And, you know, so we make a scale that benchmarks against a location like that, and then you can compare the air on your property to that location. And it kind of sets up that argument of, well, if we regulate this issue here, why on earth wouldn't we regulate it for someone who's living downwind of 7 oil and gas wells or right by a CAFOS? And so, like, what I'm imagining Zen Girl is that, like, we would work with a bunch of CAFOS and oil and gas communities. They would all appear on that scale above a major municipal sewage treatment plant where we, you know, do manage this issue. I know that wasn't one sentence.
It was a good try.
That's okay. And also, Sean just also posted a link in the comments about the process of data validation that they went through with the lead test. Sean, do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Sure. Should I share my screen, or do you guys want to just follow that link yourselves?
Either's fine. If you want to point to things on the screen, then you should go ahead and share it.
Okay, let's go ahead. It's easy enough. Yeah, so we started out with the problem of trying to circumvent some of the institutional ways of measuring and reporting lead that we use in our society, because we've had a lot of problems with those in the past, most recently Flint, but before that Washington, D.C. had major problems with the bodies that are supposed to be testing lead in water failing to do so appropriately. When they do find problems, they fail to report them appropriately. And in the case of Washington, D.C., it went on for about 4 years and probably subjected over 500,000 people to toxic levels of lead, and miscarriages went up by 30%, and, you know, all kinds of crazy stuff went on. So that was kind of the starting point for us. And then we've gone on a long process from there to try to figure out how we could do a little better. And our initial inspiration was around citizen science and just having, you know, boots on the ground, one, but two, having boots that you trust. You know, people like you and me who have the same motivations as you and me, and aren't complicated by trying to avoid finding problems in municipal systems, which I think a lot of, you know, the people who are charged with testing these things, they have, you know, they're good people, but they sometimes come with mixed motivations. So this was, I thought, a citizen science approach kind of circumvented that. So we initially wanted to make things super cheap and easy and like off the shelf, and it was just going to be super great. So we started using these lead test kits you can get at like Amazon or Home Depot or wherever. They're pretty cheap. They're like $10 a piece. And we thought this was going to be great. I'm an engineer, so I thought computer science was going to be able to score these tests a lot better than we would otherwise. So we started diving into that and validating these tests, and found out these tests aren't very good. So we did some full mass spec and other methods of testing lead in water. So these are like the standard bearer tests. They're expensive to run. The way we did it was we partnered with academic institutions who have these big machines that are available to them, and would do the tests for us. And then we could very carefully compare the strip test with these more sensitive test measures. And then, we did this poster for the AWWA annual meeting. And basically what we did is we looked at both how much lead, and we created spiked water. So we added our own lead, so we knew exactly how much went into it, and then ran the test in both of these strip and mass spec type conditions. And what you can see is basically that there's a huge variance we found on our strips compared to how much lead there actually was. So for example, you could have 60 parts per billion of lead, which is a toxic level of lead. 15 parts per billion is the EPA threshold. And you could, in 3 different measurements of that, you could end up with a variation that spanned the entire variation of the data set that we captured from these strips when we spiked, equivalent to when we spiked it with 5 parts per billion of lead up to when we spiked it with 100 parts per billion of lead. So it was neither accurate and nor was it consistent, in fact. So that's kind of the process we've been through, and now we've kind of dialed back and we're thinking more broadly about how citizen science can still solve this, but maybe with tests that are available by other means. Right now, our current method is to kind of hack the New York City system. In New York City, you can actually order a lead test kit, a mass spec lead test kit. They give you 2 bottles to your house. And then we're going to be using those to test public drinking fountains in parks and playgrounds and in public housing and things like that. But one of the reasons I'm super excited about joining this group today is to learn more about what kinds of testing we could be doing and what y'all are expert in and all that stuff.
That's really awesome. I just wanted to say, I know some people are saying, in the chat also that like people have had similar issues with H2S tests and things like this. And, this methodology as like a template to look at like the validity of a test, test it against a different method is a really awesome thing to do in the general sense with any low cost kit, whether it's DIY or not. I mean, is the lead test you're using one like this? This is like this.
Let me stop sharing so I can see.
Yeah. I bought this for 75 cents at like a corner store somewhere, and I just have no idea what this lead test really tells me. And that's true of many tests. So, it'd be awesome to see maybe your poster and such post on our site. I think people would be really interested in running any test versus any other test that purports to measure the same thing. And I love the hacking the free tests system, because there are free tests available or very cheap ones available in different places, and that's a great idea.
Yeah, just to that, I was just going to say to that point, that lead test is definitely the exact same test we tested, because as best we can tell, there is one maker, and we're trying to partner with them early on when we were trying to figure out how we were going to, get this into as many people's hands as possible. And we used a free 200 kits that they gave us to prove that their kits were terrible.
I bet they like that.
We haven't told them yet.
This is fascinating and really important work. I was wondering, you said hack the New York City test. I live in New York when I'm not in New Orleans, and I have those 2 bottles as well. And you have to send them in for them to test it. So are you just going to lie about your location of sample collection and send them and have New York do the work?
Yeah, so what we're doing right now is we're developing a form, like a web form system that kind of walks you through and captures the kit ID that's on each kit. And then so you have to, and then we're going to validate your location using your phone's location and take pictures of the location where you took the water from and all that stuff. And yeah, that's kind of our hack, is that New York City is not going to know exactly where the water came from. I've been trying for over a year now to convince New York City that they should test their parks and playgrounds. As you are probably aware, when they were required by state law to test public schools, over 80% of public school buildings had toxic levels of lead in at least one drinking fountain. And so I've been talking to everyone from Mary Bassett to Jimmy Van Bramer and Kostas Kontantinides, who are all, relevant people. And so, so basically, kind of hacking the system. I'd love to do it a better way.
I love it. I wanted to maybe, like the idea of running it against a more expensive test, like I think this is something that everyone who's developing a community kit should think about down the road, is like, what kit does what other test or what other process, irrespective of cost or whatever, is yours sort of up against. Not to say you have to beat the other test, but just so that there's some reference point to what is it trying to do, what is it like, what is it maybe in a, to be not over ambitious, maybe what is this a cheaper and somewhat less precise version of, and for the people who want that compromise. And also I really liked in your slide noting that just because a test comes from a commercial vendor or it's in a package doesn't mean that it's legible. I mean, people are worried about whether it's sensitive, but then also a lot of tests, when you run the test and you look at the results, do you really know what that is telling you? That's a really legibility. So I think in some ways we could take a test like this, maybe not this particular one, but off-the-shelf tests of a variety of type, and essentially treat them like a community kit, where we're like, let's prototype how people are going to actually use these and know what they mean, and what is, can we make a video tutorial? Can we make more step-by-step guides, stuff like that? Because a lot of them are going to need it. So anyway, I got excited. That's a cool project.
Yeah, I mean, I also think that one of the things that I like about Public Lab and sort of doing all of this stuff in public is that there's sort of this back and forth accountability between the people making the tests and the people who are bringing those tests out in the field, right? Because if somebody hands you a lead test that they're kind of maybe sure that sort of works versus something that you can see how well it works or doesn't work, it's really interesting. And was that Sarah was just raising her hand? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, this is really interesting to hear. And Gretchen and I had talked about a problem that Public Lab had encountered with the formaldehyde off-the-shelf tubes from Draeger. And we had a similar issue with off-the-shelf tubes, Radiellos, for hydrogen sulfide. And I couldn't agree more with Jeff about the idea of replicating these formal kits, because one of the things that people always say about citizen science is, how do we know that it's valid? But so much of the stuff that's on the market hasn't been validated clearly. So I think there's a really important academic paper to actually think about co-writing, of pulling these cases together and saying, look, these are 3 different really important toxics, and these are 3 off-the-shelf kits that are used, and we found systematic problems in each of them. So Gretchen and I talked about that previously, but I think it's something that would be really interesting for Public Lab and people who are building these kits to co-author.
Yeah. Yeah, so hold on, Leslie, you're next, but I just wanted to point out, Anne Ori has joined the call. I don't know if you want to say hello and introduce yourself.
Oh, yeah, here, give me a second. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Hi, I'm Annie Ori. I am one of the founding team members of New Harmony High School here in New Orleans, and we are a school that is rooted in coastal restoration, hands-on experiential learning for kids, leaving to learn, yada, yada, yada. So I am here to learn from all the brilliant science minds out there how we can get our kids involved very early on in this process.
That's great. Well, welcome, and we're happy to have you. I also wanted to just give a quick sort of heads up. We're about 8 minutes out from the hour. We can kind of stay on and talk a little bit longer, but I know that some folks are going to have to go at 2. And while Leslie is next in stack, but while she's talking, I'm also going to drop in some links to projects for people that are working on community kits right now that weren't able to make this call. We've got a really cool microscope in the works. We've got some folks working on formaldehyde remediation. The no-flow team, which Liz might speak for a little bit, also has some really great stuff on their website. So I just want to make sure you guys have the links. Then I'm going to pass it back to Leslie.
Mine's just a quickie that I know Shannon from Stroud is not on this call right now, but one of the biggest lessons I learned from Shannon is that she became invaluable to people who manufacture sensors, because she was in the field testing these things and getting different results than the manufacturers were showing or even knew about. And she had become more knowledgeable about most of the sensors that they use than the people who produce them. So that just goes, it just shows the importance of people doing testing in many different conditions and comparing notes. So.
Well, I think there's a lot of follow-up to do with people who are actually getting their kits ready for the Community Kits Initiative. And just to, Brahm is sharing these links. If you go to publiclab.org/kits, there's also a good place to just see the community kits sort of described, and there's a place to ask questions. There's a checklist of things that you need to get in order, which is really just like a starter activity, a price list, a parts list, stuff like that. And it's an ongoing conversation. So get in there and ask questions. And we don't have to do this all on the call in the next 6 minutes. But we're gonna, we have these boxes, and at a certain point, we'll be getting your stuff and putting them in these boxes and sending them to people. So that'll be, I think, an exciting moment. We're really glad to have you all here.
Yeah, really glad. And I'm wondering if one of the follow-ups, I've learned a lot from Gretchen working on, to understand data quality and ways of comparing data quality from different tools. And, as Sarah was pointing out, there are these, we're hearing about 3 different toxics. And in this call, we're seeing 3 different projects to either compare new methods with accepted but not necessarily tested commercial methods, or proposals for new data formats generally. And Gretchen, I'm wondering if you could kind of give work with these teams and then come back with a simple way to share this more widely with people, so that they understand, so that people who haven't even embarked upon comparing data quality have a handhold. What do you think would be useful?
You mean sort of like a science communication about the, kind of even about the idea of that what, a number is a number, but what does that number mean, kind of thing, and how to get at the, some, kind of more how to get at something that's accurate and precise, and how do we know what's accurate, that sort of thing?
Well, I don't know exactly, but I remember your work on the activity categories from last year. And I remember one of them was, I believe, testing the method, or method testing. I'm not sure what we ended up naming it. And each of these projects within it, each of these projects was so is so multifaceted, and when they're described in full, they're amazing. But actually, we could pull out that method testing activity that each one of these projects did, and actually each one could have its own research note and get tagged method testing, and then maybe you could do that science communication you described and have these individual examples to point to. I mean, perhaps.
If folks are up for that, totally.
Would that be a kind of a follow-up we could do? That would be, oh my God, that's an adorable baby. That would be Sean with Citizen Spring, breaking out that part of your poster where you specifically talked about how you set up the tests and explained maybe a little bit more. I mean, if you used expensive equipment that were available in academic lab, I mean, we could just explain that and just write up that one part, and then so we see, okay, here's how different lead testing approaches were comparatively tested. And then Sarah's got that beautiful slide about a colorimetric scale that's not parts per million, but it is relative and lets a lot more people enter that conversation. And then that's a really incredible way to that could be compared across methods. And then again with Programmer 1200. I'm gonna stop talking. Sorry for talking so much, but just I think it's a real frontier for open source development. to not only make the thing, but figure out how to set up these comparative tests. Open source quality control is underdeveloped. And I've been really inspired by your work on this call. So thanks, everybody.
A more general way to do what Liz is talking about might be more akin to just peer review. Each one of these projects, kits, testing systems, is going to need to be validated in a number of ways. And they don't all need the same type of validation, but they all need to be checked on somehow. And that could just be part of the general review process that goes on casually, very informally at Public Lab, where people comment on other research notes, and the author might then change something. But if no one comments on your research note, then nothing happens. And Public Lab then has to take the responsibility of either accepting this kit or not. But Public Lab likes to work with the community to make these kinds of decisions. So it might be that Public Lab needs to set up a committee or a group of community members and staff members who are assigned to some of these projects and drill down and get the authors to show the results and demonstrate that how accurate and precise it is, and work with them. If the community's not going to do it automatically, comment on all your research notes. And believe me, most research notes don't have comments. I'm still waiting for Jeff to comment on my notes, and nothing. Just, maybe now and then they'll say, oh, this is nice, thanks. But come on, Jeff, you can do better than that.
Well, in my defense, I mean, one thing that we're trying to do here, I guess, through community kits is get people using things and using actually as close as possible the same things in small groups and to troubleshoot them. And so community kits as an idea, as an initiative, is designed to support and encourage lots of people to run through the same process and to swap notes and have a discussion about it. So hopefully that will not only increase the number of comments on all of your notes, but it'll also, things will go wrong. People are going to have trouble, and they're going to post questions, and people are going to answer each other's questions and come up with solutions. Some of the projects, people will eventually say, this isn't working. Like, we can't get this to work in this way. We have to try something different. We're going to have to reconfigure. But we can't do that without sort of encouraging and facilitating this online conversation and in-person conversation. So I think the community kits are part of that, and I think it's really exciting to have people, the idea of people getting the same exact materials in 20 different places and to have their own unique troubles and difficulties with them. And so I'm hoping that this will energize some of that process. And I agree, we will need some structure to it as we go. But we will also need some support for it. We'll need some encouragement, and we'll need some sort of helping along the way to get this going. Because we can't just mandate that things happen. We have to, put some energy into it and encourage people and rally people to do.
Yeah, I think there's some well-known ways to do that, and I think you did it with the riffle 2 years ago. You sold some beta riffles for $20 a piece, and that was a real bargain. They're $60 now, and I bought one because it was clearly a good price. And I then played with it for a few months. And I don't know how many of them you sold at $20 during that beta test, but there were 10 research notes published on the riffle because of that. And that may be the only way to do it. I mean, you kind of have, Public Lab has to step up and support this. You have to give away some stuff. Give 10 or 20 people a free toy, and 3 of them will publish a research note on it. It's very hard to encourage people to do it. But, I think making a small group aware of each other, having a small part of the community that all gets a toy, that all gets encouraged to work with it. And I don't know how else you encourage these people, but I think there are some ways that you can probably encourage a group of 10 or so people, not just by giving them free stuff, but by rallying around this group and publicizing it and making a big deal about it.
No, Chris, I think this is it's such a good point, and it's something that we've tried a number of different ways of doing something similar to exactly what you're explaining right now. And I think one of the lessons really learned for me when we were doing this with the oil testing beta kit program, which if you remember was sort of similar, of sending out, I think, I don't even know, we did maybe 30 of them free to people who would just go through the documentation process, was actually, even on that one, that the barrier was high in terms of the step-by-steps that would need to be done just to get through that initial testing of the kit. So I think, like, while getting a bunch of them out there is really helpful, and you can, start to see some of the feedback loop come in, the documentation to support that initial step-by-step process and the way to break that down and make it simple for someone who's a newcomer to do for the first time is equally as important.
So I think I also interrupted. Sarah had her hand up, and I apologize for butting in front. You're on mute, though.
Go ahead, Jeff. No worries.
Oh, no, I've said what I need to. I think you had your hand up, though, if you want to chime in.
Oh, I just want to say this takes a lot of time. I mean, I really have to, so we started the photo paper thing back in 2011. It's 2017 and we're edging onto a kit for that one method. So I think there's quite a lot of managing expectations. And I know when I went into this, I was like, oh, we're going to figure this out really quick. And it is so tricky, actually, the question of knowing the sensitivity of your test. And so I think there's something about doing a slow science movement, trying to slow this down and managing people's expectations and making the steps super incremental, because the turnaround for just testing the photo paper kit, if you're going to actually go through and replicate this, that's going to take a person 2 months to put everything out, to send it back, to get it analyzed, to look at the results. So part of it is matching that expectation, which is why I do think I don't know, I mentioned funding, but I think really validating and saying replication is what we really support. Initial production is great, but we really as a community value the idea that others can replicate this. I don't know how we do that, but.
I mean, just a brief thought on it. I think the oil testing kit program was cool because a lot of people did go through a lot of steps, but I think that we asked for really a lot, a huge number of things all at once. And, we sort of did it in stages, but just thinking about things in smaller chunks. Let's all get to step one and let's rally around this and just compare notes on step one. Let's not try to get people to do 6 steps over 3 or 4 months as the very first thing, but let's iterate in tighter cycles and do, and check in. So I think, the oil testing kit was a complicated project, but I think we did learn a lot from going through that, and we're hoping to do even better, on some of these.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the reasons why we've sort of kind of put community kits sort of on the burner, or sort of on the front burner here. Just so that we recognize that that's a lot of work, and it sort of takes a lot of effort to kind of get a community to hop in and do things when you want them done. But we have bandwidth, and we've got a little bit of a budget, and we're here to kind of help organize this process and sort of help nudge and poke where things need nudging and poking, so that, I think slow science is meaningful, but we want to kind of give it a little push where it needs a push, and hopefully that is helpful for the community process. And with that said, we're at about 2:08, and I know that there are folks that need to kind of hop off of this call and hop onto other calls. So I'm going to kind of start to wrap this up. This whole video is going to be posted, I don't know, tomorrow, day after, something like that. And yeah, we'd love to kind of keep these conversations going. So, I think most of us are online on Public Lab, and you can kind of find us all and reach out. And we absolutely would love to follow up on the conversations that we've started today, and we're excited to sort of see where this goes from here. Are there any last words from anybody else, or are we good to go? Anyone?
Can I hang on with Jeff and Amanda for a minute? Or do you guys have to go?
Only a little bit.
No, really, no, I only have one question. But everybody else can go.
All right, so everyone else, if you don't want to be on a phone call with Chris and our kids store.
You're all welcome to stay.
Thanks, everybody.
Right, see you guys later. Bye.
Thank you. So I got an order from
Wait, hang on just a second.
Jeff